The Galactic Council chambers fell silent as Ambassador Susan of the Vexari entered, her crystalline form refracting the harsh lights of 100 worlds. Behind her walked Evan, her human husband, unremarkable in his simple gray suit. The representatives from civilizations, spanning 3 spiral arms, barely acknowledged him. Humans were known commodities, now clever merchants, decent diplomats, acceptable engineers. Nothing special. Susan had heard the whispers for years. Why would a Vexari noble marry such an ordinary human? What does she see in him? Even her own family had questioned her choice. Evan taught xenolinguistics at a university on New Terra. He collected ancient Earth poetry. He spoke softly and smiled more than he talked. To the galaxy's great powers, he was merely the quiet academic who followed his more accomplished wife to state dinners and treaty signings. The Kresh Dominion has issued its ultimatum, High Chancellor Vorath announced, his 3 mouths speaking in grim unison. They demand the outer colonies submit to their authority within 1 solar cycle. Failure to comply will result in orbital bombardment of civilian populations. The council erupted. The Kresh were warriors. Their empire built on subjugation. For 2 centuries, the council had maintained an uneasy peace through careful diplomacy and mutual defense pacts. But the Kresh had grown bold, their fleet now outnumbering all council forces combined. We must negotiate, urged the Pelian representative, their tentacles writhing anxiously. Negotiation is surrender, countered General Thrix of the Armored Worlds. But we cannot win militarily. The projections are clear. Susan watched Evan as the debate raged. He stood perfectly still, his brown eyes distant, focused on something beyond the ornate chamber walls. She knew that look. She'd seen it only twice before in their 10 years together, once when a medical crisis threatened to kill thousands on a colony station, and once when faulty reactor calculations nearly destroyed an entire settlement. Both times, he had disappeared into whatever space existed inside his mind, emerging with solutions that seemed to materialize from nowhere. Perhaps, Evan said quietly, there's another option. The chamber didn't even pause. His voice was too soft, too easily lost in the cacophony of galactic powers deciding the fate of billions. Susan's crystalline hand touched his arm. She knew better than to interrupt what was coming, but she needed to anchor him, to remind him where he was. Evan, she whispered. Are you certain? He looked at her then, and she saw what the rest of the galaxy couldn't. Behind those gentle brown eyes wasn't the mild academic they all dismissed. There was something old there. Something that remembered when humans fought with sharpened metal and still conquered their world. Something that had never really left. Just learned to dress in tweed and speak in libraries. I'm certain, he said, and this time his voice carried. The chamber fell silent. The Kresh operate on a dominance hierarchy, Evan continued, walking toward the central display where holographic representations of fleets and star systems floated in tactical array. Every species they've conquered, they've done so through a single decisive battle. They challenge, they win, they rule. It's cultural, genetic, fundamental to how they process reality. We know this, Vorath said impatiently, which is why we cannot defeat them. We lack the military strength. You lack their military strength, Evan corrected, his fingers dancing across the holographic interface. But you're thinking about this wrong. The Kresh don't respect strength alone. They respect dominance, precision, the ability to strike fear so complete that resistance becomes unthinkable. He brought up Earth's historical database. Images flickered. Ancient warriors. Strategic campaigns. Humans doing what they'd done for millennia before they reached the stars. Humans spent 10,000 years perfecting the art of war, Evan said, his quiet voice now carrying an edge that made even Susan's crystalline structure resonate with an unfamiliar frequency. We fought with stones, bronze, iron, steel. We developed strategies so devastating they're still taught in military academies. We built empires and burned them down. We survived ice ages and global conflicts, and turned our weapons to the stars. And then we stopped. Not because we forgot how, because we chose to. He pulled up fleet positions, trade routes, supply lines. His fingers moved with a speed and precision that seemed impossible for someone who'd never held a military commission. The Kresh fleet has 17 critical vulnerabilities. Their supply chain depends on 3 nexus points. Their command structure is hierarchical. Remove the top, and the body becomes paralyzed. Their greatest strength is their fleet concentration, which is also their greatest weakness. The council members leaned forward now, drawn by something in his voice, his posture, the way he commanded the space. "I can give you a battle plan," Evan said. 1 engagement. 14 hours. Minimal casualties on our side. Complete psychological domination on theirs. But I need unanimous authority. And I need every species to commit their fleets without question. "This is madness," someone objected. "He's a teacher." Susan's laugh was like crystal bells chiming. "He is a human," she said, and there was pride in her voice that made the chamber collectively reconsider what that word meant. "This is what you've never understood about them. They didn't join the galactic community because they needed to. They joined because they wanted peace. But peace was always their choice, never their nature." Evan brought up one final image, a simulation of his proposed engagement. It was beautiful in its brutality, elegant in its efficiency, a symphony of coordinated strikes that would dismantle the Kresh fleet like a surgeon removing a tumor. "In Earth's ancient history," Evan said softly, "there was a saying, si vis pacem, parabellum. If you want peace, prepare for war. We prepared. We just chose not to show you what we'd prepared." The vote was unanimous. 14 hours later, the Kresh Dominion offered unconditional surrender. Their fleet admiral, witnessing the systematic dismantling of his forces by tactics he couldn't comprehend, executed by species he'd considered inferior, led by a human he'd never heard of, realized he'd made a fundamental error. He hadn't been facing the Council's armies. He'd been facing something far more dangerous, a human who'd finally drawn his sword. Susan found Evan afterwards, back in his simple gray suit, reading poetry in their quarters as if he hadn't just revolutionized galactic warfare. "You shook the world," she said softly. He looked up and smiled that gentle smile she'd fallen in love with. "I shook many worlds, actually. 37 inhabited systems. By current count." She settled beside him, her crystalline form dimming to match the soft light he preferred. "Why didn't you ever tell them what humans really are?" Evan turned a page in his book Actual Paper, Ancient Earth Poetry, and considered the question. "Because," he said finally, "the greatest weapon isn't the sword. It's the enemy never knowing you have one until the moment you draw it." Outside their window, 1,000 ships from 100 worlds hung in formation, and every one of them was commanded by someone who would never again underestimate the quiet human reading poetry in the corner. The end.